Hello, friends. Welcome to episode 98 of the Alabama Liberal Podcast. Today I'm going to be talking about customer abuse, Elon's investments, and the new monopolies. Now, I try to do every episode pretty well or to the best of my abilities. I think most episodes are pretty good. Some are better than others. I think this one's going to be really good. No matter who you are, you're going to probably be able to relate to this specific issue of price gouging, customer service collapsing. Why do businesses look at us as not like we love our customers, we need our customers, you guys keep us in business, we want to do everything we can to keep you as customers, to now being walking dollar signs that they can squeeze every penny and every nickel out of. I think everybody's frustrated with the environment where people no longer care if we stay with them as a company. Customer service has collapsed because the businesses themselves have gone from being like, oh no, we value your business, stay with us, to being like, take it or leave it. If you don't want it, fuck you. And the reason for that is the new monopolies. Now I'm going to talk about a lot of companies that dominate almost every industry, and some of these you've heard of. You're familiar that there's only 4 major airlines in the United States. You may know that there's only 4 major meat producers in the U.S. that we get most of our meat from. You may have heard that there's only 2 diaper companies, stuff like that you may be familiar with. But some of these other industries, I promise you, you do not know about some of these companies that monopolize industries because they don't look like one huge company. There's several dozen companies all owned by one huge parent company, some of it private equity companies that you've never heard of, I've never heard of. You may not even think that these are industries that are being monopolized, but they are. And I think it's shocking how little competition exists in almost every industry in America. And I'm going to get into some of those nooks and crannies in a minute. But of course, there was a lot of news between the February episode and the March episode now. And almost all of it bad, right? Alexei Navalny was murdered in a Russian prison. I think we all knew that's how he would wind up eventually, but it's still depressing when that actually happens. Katie Britt went out there and embarrassed Alabama yet again. We now have 2 really embarrassing senators from Alabama. Katie Britt did the State of the Union rebuttal, and I thought, by God, I thought Tommy Tupperville was dumb, but then she comes out there from the Karen School of Acting and gives a hysterical performance where one minute she's smiling and talking about warm days with Trump, and in the next minute Mexican immigrants are going to rape and murder us and dump our body in a ravine. I mean, that's kind of how she was phrasing it, and I thought, my Lord, she's like Liam Neeson in Taken, where she's intense as hell 1 second, 2 seconds later she's smiling like the most cheerful weather girl in Alabama, and you think this is really the best they could do? I mean, somebody who's been in the Senate for 1 year. Other Alabama news that's even more embarrassing. I mean, she comes by it honest, being from a state that thinks frozen embryos are people. According to the Alabama Supreme Court, IVF has now become a nightmare. And of course, that just goes to all the episodes I did last year and the year before about abortion. When the Supreme Court first overturned Roe versus Wade, really made a huge mistake doing that with stuff exactly like what Alabama's doing. Because those of us from red states who grew up in red states, we know that abortion people are just fanatical. They're a minority. Even in Alabama, I think they're a minority. But they're so fanatical, and they vote exclusively on that one issue, just like a gun nut would. But for them, they're abortion nuts. Once they find out that women's periods and menstruation actually releases hundreds of unfertilized eggs that come out of that, they're probably going to ban periods somehow. Really getting to be so extreme. And this is why the Supreme Court made such a huge mistake overturning Roe versus Wade, because this flood of crazy fucking state legislatures would come out with these bills to where you'll have a tractor salesman in DeKalb County who works 30 days out of the year. State representatives in Alabama are 30 days out of the year. They're part-time jobs. They're not somebody's full-time job. There's no qualifications. Any idiot can be elected to that job. And a lot of idiots have been elected to that job down in Montgomery. Abortion ought to be illegal, and frozen embryos, yeah, those sound like people to me, and stem cell research, outlaw that. They're making decisions that the women in Alabama, they have to live under these rulings. They have to live in these repressive regimes where they're trying to outlaw every possible method of abortion, and even just a woman having her eggs frozen to have IVF. And this was always going to be the extremity that it was taken to. Not that the Supreme Court cares. Another big story is they seem determined to plunge us into a constitutional crisis by agreeing to even hear a case that would say whether or not Trump is able to break the law as president. This is a case they should have never even heard, and last year they declined to hear it. It's only now that the trial was about to go forward that they decided to help Trump out and bail him out. They're bending all the rules for this guy. We're constantly seeing justice subverted for this clown. It seems like people are bending over backwards to delay justice until he can pardon himself, if he's able to, or do it. And it all comes down to a handful of purple states that get to say whether an aspiring tyrant is a better president than the man who pulled us out of COVID and possible recession. Gee, I wonder. Really tough choice on that one. They're going to hear this case that we know they're not going to rule in Trump's favor, because if they were to say, oh yeah, it turns out the president can break laws, Biden's president right now. He could come in and be like, well, I disbanded the Supreme Court. They're like, no, you can't do that. Well, you just said I can do whatever I want, so I'm going to arrest all 6 of the conservative justices. Your own ruling just just said that I can do what I like as president. I don't have to follow the law. So they're not going to actually give Trump the ability to break the law freely, but they're going to push it down the road to where it's after the election. And that some mindless purple state voters who are barely paying attention could say, well, he hadn't been convicted of anything. Well, his trials have been delayed forever because of some judges, many of whom he appointed. This Supreme Court, Clarence Thomas should recuse himself from this case. Brett Kavanaugh, Gorsuch, and Amy Coney Barrett should recuse themselves from this case. 4 out of the 6 conservative justices should not even be allowed to hear this case. They should recuse themselves as they've either been appointed by Trump or their wife was cheering on the insurrection for Trump. Only 2 out of the 6 conservative justices should even be able to hear this case. And that would mean that this case shouldn't be heard at all, because it takes 4 justices to agree to hear a case for it to be heard. And I'm guaranteeing you some of those 4 I mentioned, they would have had to have said, yes, let's hear this case, and then have no plans to recuse themselves. Trump basically becoming the de facto nominee by Nikki Haley suspending her campaign. I wish she'd stayed in there forever, is just to say, you can't push me out and intimidate me. It's amazing that the Republican women like Liz Cheney and Nikki Haley, they have more guts than the wannabe tyrants, DeSantis and all them, who just immediately roll over and have let Trump have whatever he wants. Mitch McConnell agreeing to step down from his Senate leadership position, mostly because Trump wants him to. And arguably the most depressing news of all, Ronna McDaniel, a Trump appointee who is totally up his butt, being pushed aside from the RNC to allow his own daughter-in-law, Laura Trump, who has come in to say every dime that we raise for campaign contributions needs to go to Trump. The Republican Party becoming a fascist cult for one person is scary in a country where we're binary. It's only Republicans and Democrats. And so to have the Republican Party be completely taken over by the worst president this country's ever had and the worst presidential candidate now, the worst ex-president we've ever had, yeah, it is scary as hell, because it makes you wonder, is there a way to pull back from this? Mike Johnson, one of the people responsible for the insurrection, is the Speaker of the House. It's almost certain that he will not certify the election for Biden, and sat behind him at the State of the Union with that fucking smug smirk on his face. He almost looked like a little kid who knew he had a serious job to do, and he's like, oh, this is what an adult would do, like pretending to be the Speaker of the House with those big jug ears looking like the fucking kid from Mad Magazine. I mean, Kevin McCarthy and John Boehner and Paul Ryan, they all showed Obama and Joe Biden disrespect in various ways, but they usually would stand up and clap for just basic things. Biden saying, Americans can do anything. This is pretty bipartisan to vaguely give inspirational talks about, oh, Americans can do whatever they feel like. Johnson sat down for that shit. If you won't even stand up for Americans can do anything they put their minds to, I mean, just absolutely anodyne, generic. It's like sitting down at the end of Rocky, like, I don't like this or whatever. I mean, you think, well, what in the hell is your problem? The one thing he stood up for was the mention of John Lewis's name. And I saw Kamala Harris give him a side eye for that one, which I think was deserved, because it's like, oh, really? Now you like John Lewis, now that he's a damn ghost? That's the only time Republicans like a civil rights activist, is when they're dead. You may be sitting here thinking, okay, all that's well and good, Alabama liberal, but can we just get an episode where you bitch and whine about prices for almost an hour straight? Well, today is your day. You are going to be so fortunate to be able to hear this, because if an old man bitching about prices is your cup of tea, you're going to love this. I want to just talk about just this year, just from January to right now. So this is only about 10 weeks that we've been in the year. This specifically I'm talking about, it's about an 8-week period, because the first couple of weeks of January, I was still trying to be like pretending I'm going to lose weight. I'd be like, oh, my New Year's resolution, I'm not going to go to any fast food places or any restaurants. Well, that lasted about 2 full weeks. So in about the last 2 months, I've been out to a fast food place 5 or 6 times. And this is every single time that I went to a fast food place, what happened and how I felt ripped off. This is going to Pizza Hut, where you think, like, okay, I hadn't had pizza in a while, and Pizza Hut, they should be the cheap option. I mean, there's certainly good pizza places within Los Angeles to eat at. Pizza Hut's not one of them, but you think, okay, I'll go for the cheaper option. I hadn't had that in a while. Go to Pizza Hut, get a large Brooklyn style or Big New Yorker, whatever they call their New York version of pizza, Meat Lovers Pizza, $36. I'm like, why don't I just bend over? This is outrageous that it costs that much. And of course, you look at the bill and there's a $2 service charge, and you think, for what? I came to your store, I ordered it at your counter, didn't even call it in. You're not delivering it. I pick it up, I take it to my house. What the hell is there a service charge for? Pizza Hut itself is owned by Yum Brand Foods, which also owns Taco Bell and KFC. Not long after that, I went to Popeyes. outrageously overpriced, but I got the full family meal, the biggest meal that they had to feed a family of 4. And I'm like, oh, can I get sauces? They go, we'll give you 2. They put 2 sauces in the bag. I said, no, I want all of your sauces. I like all the different flavors and varieties of your sauces. They would not give me all their sauces unless I paid extra for fucking sauces. You think, I can't believe this shit. Like, how do you order $70 worth of food and they can't hook you up with 5 or 6 sauces? I can't get a Mardi Gras mustard without paying extra for this shit. Then you go to Burger King, have their breakfast. I think sometimes it's nice to give my son a little bit of a treat if he's doing well in school. Go to Burger King for breakfast, get some croissant sandwiches. Same damn thing where I wanted barbecue sauce and buffalo sauce. They're like, well, we can give you one or the other, but both are going to be extra. So you got to do this Sophie's choice. Do I really feel like buffalo sauce or do I feel like barbecue sauce? What do I want? Am I willing to pay more? But it turns out Burger King and Popeyes are owned by the same parent company. The same corporation owns both of them. So this must be a thing that they're doing at all their stores where Popeyes and Burger King now do not give you all the sauce hookups that they should have. I went to Five Guys, where I think I even mentioned this in previous podcast episodes, where I go into Five Guys to get a hamburger. Yeah, okay, it had bacon on it, big fucking deal. Bacon cheeseburger, fries, and a milkshake. And the price they came up with was $34. I thought, you're just pulling this shit out of your ass. How the fuck can you justify that being $34 for a greasy fast casual place? I mean, is the burger that thick? No. Is it that juicy? Not really. I mean, it's better than In-N-Out, but that much better? Is it a restaurant quality hamburger where I can slap somebody with the patty and they knock out? No, it's not that thick of a patty. It's not that good of a meal. 34 goddamn dollars for. Then you get to perhaps the most outrageous service charge of all, where I went to Chick-fil-A, also overpriced, and then their food comes out, and at the bottom of the receipt, I don't know if anybody else in Los Angeles, if you're listening to this, has noticed this, but there's a 10-cent bag fee for the Chick-fil-A sandwich bags now, and I've noticed this at 2 separate Chick-fil-A's, so I don't think it's just one location doing this. A fucking bag fee for the paper bag that a fast food place gives you. What's the alternative to paying that? Are they just going to dump that shit in my hands? Like, really, what else can you do? There's bag fees at grocery stores in California. They've passed that. Apparently, it has not made hardly any difference at all in the amount of plastic bags used. But if you go into a grocery store, you need to have a bag. They charge you a 10-cent per bag fee. I don't think banning straws and plastic bags is really going to get the job done in terms of the environment. I think those are very minor things where we're all going to fucking die from the ice caps melting if that's what we're relying on to save us. But okay, at least it's baby steps. You can bring your own bags into the grocery store, reusable grocery bags. At Chick-fil-A, what is the alternative to paying 10 cents for a fucking paper bag? And people say, well, it's just 10 cents. Okay, I get that, but it's every goddamn thing adding up to create $200 for fast food and fast casual food that is not that good. It just wasn't what it should have been or what it should have cost. This is one of the new monopolies that's taken over. There's a group called Roark Capital that now owns dozens of fast food and fast casual places that I didn't even know were part of the same group. When you see this new Subway commercial where they're talking about it, Subway, you can get a foot-long Auntie Anne's pretzel or a foot-long cookie from Cinnabon, Auntie Anne's, Subway, Arby's, Carl's Jr., Sonic, Dunkin' Donuts, Baskin Robbins, Jimmy John's, and about a dozen other restaurant chains are all owned by the same private equity firm, which is Roark Capital, and they've kind of gone up on their prices. Private equity is systematically taking over most industries in America, and they just treat it as a vending machine. They take money out, they don't put anything back in, they drive wages down. Roark Capital is one of the groups that was strongly trying to kill legislation that would have increased the federal minimum wage to $15 an hour. The current federal minimum wage is $7.25 an hour, which is a fucking joke. Cities within red states that tried to raise it, like Birmingham, they've been met with unbelievable opposition. But at $7.25 an hour in Birmingham, I mean, can you imagine? Like, what could you get? Even in rural areas, it sucks. $7 an hour for 40 hours a week is $280 a week. Nobody can live off that, not even in the most podunk-ass place. You could go live in a rural county that barely has running water, and you're still going to be struggling to live off $280 a week. You're going to need government assistance at that point. There's almost no way for you to live without welfare. So what happens is groups like Roark Capital takes its name from the character Howard Roark, who was the hero hero of an Ayn Rand novel. And his whole thing is ruthless determination and selfishness, and I shouldn't care about anybody else, and nobody should rely on me. I shouldn't rely on anybody else. I'm totally rugged and individual. And of course, like every other person who believes that shit, the person who created that is somebody who inherited a business. Neil Aronson was able to use $100 million from friends and family to create his business, just like all these other Republican assholes who talk about, I shouldn't have to rely on the government should rely on me. And yet, Bill Ackman and Elon Musk and Donald Trump and every other asshole who talks that shit all inherited wealth. They inherited wealth, money, businesses, and then when they refuse to pay their workers anything, the government subsidizes those wages. Roark Capital, which owns these dozens of restaurant chains, millions of workers work for them, 1.4 million workers. And most of those people are eligible for government help because they don't make enough money to live off of. At this chain where this guy's like, Roark Capital, I'm a ruthless determinist and we don't need the government. Your workers need the government because they're on goddamn welfare. And then when you refuse to raise wages, you say something about, we'd have to pass that on to the consumer. The prices have gone up anyway. Consumers are still being price gouged, whether the workers are paid anything better or not. And your profits have gone up. From last year, they went from $33 billion to $37 billion. They had a $4 billion profit increase. And yet they're saying things about, we can't pay the workers better and we can't give any discounts on the merchandise. The price of business is the price of business. I'm really tired of hearing that shit. So many companies come up and say, there's just market fluctuations and inflation and we all have to pay this more money. No, corporate profits are the highest they've been and wages have gone up a little bit, but it's nothing near where the profits have gone up. But as they increase wages just a little bit and keep unions out from really increasing them, like Trader Joe's, they've doubled the cost of almost everything they sell in the store. Worker wages might go up 20% as our profits have gone up 30%. And that's about what's happening in every corporation in America. Another place you might not even realize is a stealth monopoly is candy. I don't think I realized that most of the candy we see in the stores is made by two companies. There's the Mars Company, which makes a lot of the fruity candies like Skittles, Starburst, but also M&Ms, and then Hershey, which makes almost everything else. You see the Hershey name on Kit Kats, Hershey bars, Milk Duds, almost anything you could think of. Most of the candy market, which we think of as being huge, just dozens and dozens of companies making all this, all that comes from Mars and Hershey. The same way most sodas come from Coca-Cola and PepsiCo. Do these places necessarily treat customers well? No. They've increased prices on candy. So if you're starting to sort of get the message on this to where the candy prices have gone up, there's really no way you can buy food anymore, because it used to be when you'd complain about, this restaurant Nobu, they went up on their prices and what do you expect? It's a 5-star restaurant. If you don't like that, go to Cheesecake Factory. Well, Cheesecake Factory, which also has a sizable investment from Roark Capital, they're one of the people that own that outright. They'll be like, if you don't like our Cheesecake Factory prices, which have gone up, portions have gotten smaller, prices have gone up, customer service has gotten worse. You say, if you don't like the Cheesecake Factory, then why don't you try Jimmy John's? Well, Jimmy John's is another place that fucking Roark Capital owns. So if you don't like the sit-down restaurants, they direct you to fast casual restaurants, which are owned by the same goddamn private equity company. And if you don't like the fast casual restaurants, it's, why don't you just try fast food? Well, guess what? Arby's is owned by the same fucking people. So fast food doesn't work anymore. And they say, okay, fast food's not for you. You even think fast food's too expensive, you cheap fuck. Why don't you go to the grocery store? That's where you get into a place like the Albertsons and Kroger merger, which is also going to raise prices and cut customer service to where even the grocery stores are too expensive. I'm so happy right now that Biden's administration is trying to block the merger between Albertsons and Kroger. People say, Kroger, that doesn't affect me. I don't live in a place that has a Kroger. You do, and you don't know it, because Kroger owns dozens of smaller regional grocery store chains like Ralph's. We see that in LA all the time. People don't think they're shopping at Kroger. They go into Ralph's, which is the cheaper option, to Amazon Fresh and Whole Foods, which is owned by Amazon, and Trader Joe's, which has vehemently fought unions for their workers. So people think, I'm not really going to Kroger, but they go to Fred Meyer, they go to Ralph's, they go to King Soper's, they go to Pick and Save, they go to Food for Less. All of these are owned by the same damn company, which is Kroger. People are like, but that won't really affect me because Albertsons is not in my area. Well, Albertsons, their subsidiaries are Vons, Pavilions, Randall's, Lucky, United Supermarkets. These are all places that I didn't even know were owned by the same place. At Vons and Pavilions, they both have higher prices than Ralph's does. And I'm like, man, why do Vons and Pavilions? I would have had no idea that they were all subsidiaries of Albertsons. The same parent company owns those two places. And then if they merge with Kroger, Ralph's, Vons, and Pavilions will be owned by the same place. And you can forget about it, because these are kind of the cheaper grocery store options. Amazon Fresh and Whole Foods are owned by Amazon, one of the biggest companies in the fucking world, and yet they still don't believe in much of a price savings for their grocery stores. When Amazon bought Whole Foods, they're like, we can maximize efficiency easy and we can lower prices. Have prices gone down at Whole Foods? No, they haven't. Not since Amazon bought them. If anything, the workers look more miserable because they're completely stressed out. So customer service within a Whole Foods has collapsed. You used to go into a Whole Foods which had a little bit of a hippy-dippy Ben and Jerry's type corporate culture where people actually enjoyed coming to work and they'd be like, can I help you find something? Or did you find everything that you're looking for? Now you go up to the register and instead of, did you find everything you're looking for? It's like, get the fuck out of here. It's like, oh, you know what? I didn't find that mayonnaise. Why don't you look for it, you son of a bitch? They're so stressed out because Amazon is trying to maximize efficiency, quote unquote, by having them running around constantly as the prices have gone up. So if you say, well, Whole Foods, that's a bougie grocery store and you got to take out a second mortgage to buy groceries at Air One, I'll go to the cheap place called Ralph's. If they raise their prices up where Vons and Pavilions are, once they're all under the Kroger Albertsons umbrella, really, where the fuck are you going to go? You got to go to the fucking desert to buy groceries at some terrible grocery store that sucks and has almost no options. If the food in the grocery stores is made by 3 or 4 different companies, the grocery stores themselves are owned by 3 or 4 different companies. That's all the way down from the highest end restaurants to the big chain sit-down restaurants to the big chain fast casual restaurants to the fast food restaurants to the high-end grocery stores like Whole Foods to the bottom-end grocery stores like Ralph's. There's no fucking place that you're going to be able to buy food if it's all dominated by a handful of huge companies, and then the meat in the grocery stores is produced by 4 meat producers, which you've probably heard that statistic before. I'm from Marshall County, Alabama, which is known for chicken plants. There was like 6 big poultry plants at one time when I was growing up. Tyson, Gold Kist, Purdue. And in that town, you could see the difference once they started being built. We went from having about 5% Latino population to about 40% Latino population. Most of it illegal. And they wanted people like that in the chicken plants so they could pay them nothing. And if they got hurt or injured, they couldn't file OSHA complaints. That was what it really came down to, was worker safety and things like liability. A state like Alabama is already a right-to-work state, but even if you were to get your thumb cut off, if you were an illegal immigrant in Alabama, a state very known for deporting people, you'd be scared to death to fucking complain about it. There wouldn't be a lot of outlets for you. So if the workers of these places are treated like garbage, it shouldn't be any big surprise. The customer is eventually being treated like garbage, and we are. Everywhere you go, we're being abused by a handful of companies that no longer have any incentive to even provide the service they claim to for us. Another stealth monopoly that people have probably never even thought about being a monopoly is Match Group. Internet dating, you think like, my God, like how obscure are we getting with this? But internet dating is a big part of the way people meet each other now. But you see a dozen different dating apps that people think are going to maybe lead to something, and they don't because they're all owned by Match Group. Match.com, Plenty of Fish, Hinge, OkCupid, Tinder, Our Time, and a handful of others are all owned by one fucking company, Match Group. There is almost no real dating competition in the internet dating sector because there's a handful of outliers, like Christian Mingle and JDate, which they're all owned by one company as well. All the religious sites, they're owned by one very specific company. But other than that, and eHarmony, which is pretty much dead, I think they pretty much gave up on eHarmony when that Fossil who created it, when he was in the ads, that 70-year-old man who really gave me the creeps. Basic competition has pretty much been declared dead, and Match Group now owns most of it. Well, how could that be a problem? It's a huge problem. You used to see Match.com ads where they were saying, we've led to more marriages and more relationships and more successful dating than any other website ever. But now you don't see that anymore. Now the Match.com commercials are like some guy wandering around the street, hey, you want to have a cup of coffee with this guy? Does he look all right or whatever? They've gone from promising you marriage or a lasting relationship to being like, maybe you'll meet somebody cool. Give us $50 a month. If one internet dating company owns most of the apps, they no longer have an incentive to give you a happily ever after for you to find your person and get off those apps. Right now, what it is people are on Tinder for a few months. They're like, oh, the Tinder sucks. I'll go to Match.com. They're on Match.com for a few months. Like, oh, this is too expensive. I'll go to Hinge. You're just shifting around to the same company. And that's how they like it. Because theoretically, if you were to find somebody on one of the apps, meet them, you and them fell in love, and you got together forever, and you're together and you're off these apps, they no longer make money off of you. It changes the the entire dynamic of what the customer wants and what's best for the business. Those things are now diametrically opposed. What's best for the business is for you to stay single and frustrated and dependent on these apps forever. And what's best for the customer is to eventually get their money's worth and get off. But if you do that, they can no longer make any money off of you. So then the dating pool gets smaller. Right now, it's best if you just are on a site for a few months, you have a dopamine hit of being like, oh, look, I've got a match on Tinder. Oh, God, they live in the Philippines and I'm in the U.S. And then you get so frustrated with that dynamic, you eventually go to a different one and they shuffle it around like three-card monte. So that's a very good example of a business and a consumer who have two different needs and they're not the same thing. Another example of that, in an industry I never even thought about being monopolized, is the tax preparation industry. So here it is, mid to late March, and people are probably thinking about their taxes. You know, I'm usually the person who thinks about it April the 12th and being like, oh shit. The tax preparation industry is a complete and total scam perpetrated by one company, TurboTax. Americans should be able to file their tax returns free and easy and through a government portal. This is what some other countries are able to do. You go to a free government website. They already know basically how much you make, and you just enter a couple of keystrokes of information, and there's your tax returns. But TurboTax and Intuit, the parent company, have fought Americans being able to do this. They're like, oh, why let the government do it? We'll do it instead, and we'll offer a free private version that's going to be better than anything the government could do. Well, of course, this is a multi-billion-dollar industry, and they have no goddamn incentive to ever do anything like that. For them to offer a free government software would be essentially killing their business. The same way that oil companies are never going to get on the environmentally friendly page. The ex-CEO of Chevron literally said, we hate wind and solar because they're free. Free is not a good business model for us. That's why you started seeing the alternative energy movement, now perpetrated by people like Joe Rogan, be like, we need nuclear power. With gas and oil, you have to spend money to explore, to find the gas and oil, to get it out of the ground. It's not something I can just do as an individual person. The way that a windmill just automatically is renewable energy, and then it eventually becomes free for me to charge my house with solar and wind, charge my car with solar and wind. That energy grid eventually becomes essentially free for the energy usage cost. That'll never be true for coal, oil, natural gas, and nuclear power. Never. So some of what the oil companies would like to do is, if indeed there is any alternative to oil and gas, slow it down as much as possible, and then also put things forward that an individual person can't do, like hydrogen power or nuclear power. You still need an industry to be able to generate that power, and it'll never be free. Nuclear and hydrogen might be cheaper, but it'll never be free the way wind and solar could be. No reason whatsoever that a state like California, which has mostly sunny days and a lot of windy days, couldn't be completely powered by wind and solar. People said, oh, those aren't realistic. Those aren't possible. Yeah, how are we going to get that nuclear power plant built over there? There's no need for it. They need it. The industry around it needs it. The same way that TurboTax and Intuit, they don't want a free government version that's simple and easy to use. They want to make a so-called free private version. When you really click on it and you try to use it, it redirects you to the one that costs money, because they don't ever want to give away the golden goose for free. They make billions of dollars off of this. So this is an example of what the consumer needs and what private industry needs from them, which is their money, and they'll never, ever get rid of this. When people are wondering about the U.S. economy and being like, how can we feel this way where the economy is robust, supposedly, but we feel taken advantage of? We feel like walking meat sacks, just pumping dollars into a big company that doesn't give a shit about us. I have Geico insurance. Geico insurance is supposed to take care of me for my car when my car gets hit. My car got hit. I called them. They'll be like, yeah, that sucks. What are you going to do about it? No, what are you going to do about it? You're my insurance company. They're like, oh, no, you have to deal with this yourself. Basically abandoned me and let me deal with this problem myself. All these insurance companies are basically the same way. We pay them money for nothing. Geico Insurance, who's that owned by? Berkshire Hathaway. Warren Buffett, the stingy, greedy bastard that we've put on a pedestal for being a stingy, greedy bastard his entire life, has dozens of companies within Berkshire Hathaway, almost all of which get worse after he buys them. Geico Insurance, Dairy Queen. Dairy Queen sucks now that Berkshire Hathaway owns it. I mean, you can tell a dramatic drop from the Dairy Queen I ate at as a kid to the Dairy Queen I go into today. The employees look miserable. The food's not as good. It's because of companies that buy this stuff, and then they think, oh, how can we maximize profits? That's what it's all about. It's not even really about, like, how can we maintain a customer base that loves us so much? They have no incentive to go anywhere else. And Berkshire loves monopolies. The guy has talked about repeatedly, he likes businesses that have a moat. That's Apple. That's one of Berkshire's largest stakes. Bank of America was a big stake at one point. He likes companies where it's very difficult to compete with them. Then he can maximize profits or drain as much money out of it as he can. They own a big stake in Paramount Global. Paramount Global is one of only 6 major media companies in the United States, the largest media market in the world. And just in terms of consumers and their entertainment, how much people consume it worldwide, people watch Hollywood movies all over the world. You think about Paramount Global and Geico Insurance and Dairy Queen. These are 3 different industries, but they're all being owned by the same greedy fucking 95-year-old. The 100-year-old partner that he had, Charlie Munger, he finally died. They used to talk about, oh, Buffett and Munger, Buffett and Munger. I'm like, yeah, more like Scrooge and Marley. I mean, these 2 guys are pretty good representation of what's wrong and that they're constantly lionized by the business community as being geniuses. And all they've really done is to buy companies that have a quasi-monopoly and then extract money out of them. Neil Aronson, the guy that started Rourke Capital and inherited a shitload of money from his parents to start it, right beside the video that I saw on YouTube being like, here's the evil company buying Subway and all your other favorite brands, talking about the evils of Neil Aronson. Right beside that was a Forbes video from Forbes' YouTube channel being like, the genius billionaire trying to save Subway. So these private equity companies that take over industries that are not even really struggling, like Paramount Global wants to be bought out by a private equity company. I'm sure they'll make it worse in 100 different ways, but I'm sure when they do that, it'll be celebrated by CNBC and Forbes magazine being like, oh my God, the genius businessmen that are trying to save the home of the Transformers or whatever, because that's just how differently we view it. Companies that are being ransacked and looted. Cerberus Capital that owns Albertsons, when they bought that was celebrated by the business community. The stock went up, and yet all they've really done is go on a looting spree, cutting wages, jacking up prices, hurting consumers, making everything worse. But that's how different the values are skewed, to where these things that happen all the time is celebrated by people who are in business, most of whom don't really know what they're talking about, might have inherited a lot of advantages. They think they're really smart, but anybody can look smart when they're Bill Ackman or Donald Trump or any of the other more localized small business people who have inherited businesses from their parents. I mean, if you're raised for one specific thing your whole life and it's $1 million business, anybody can look pretty fucking smart. People in my family did just that and then thought, oh, I know more than anybody else. Move out of the way, Neil deGrasse Tyson. There's a bit of a false confidence that comes with that, and that kind of brings us to Elon Musk's investments. This is somebody who claims the tax rate is too high, that he has no money to pay taxes, but he has money to fund Ron DeSantis' presidential campaign, a huge waste of money. We'll probably never know exactly how much money he gave Ron DeSantis. With super PACs, it's kind of hard to tell exactly how much money they're getting, but there were several billionaires that were backing DeSantis, and that money went totally up in smoke. I mean, it was a complete waste. The second he lost the Iowa caucus, the famously unpredictive caucus that almost never determines the actual winner, he's like, well, I'm out, guys. Thanks for the hundreds of millions of dollars. I appreciate that. Yeah, I'll take them and put them in my war chest for when and if I ever run again, or just use it to control politicians that owe me favors, because, hundreds of millions of dollars. If I want to give a state representative $25K for a make or break bid for him, he'll owe me forever. So you can take that and create a political patronage system that's pretty valuable for you to do that off somebody else's money. Musk has the money to fund Ron DeSantis. He's got the money to sue the National Labor Relations Board, actively trying to make companies worse. He's fought unions forever. He's got money for their political campaigns and lawsuits and $43 billion to waste buying Twitter and systematically trying to run that into the ground. If you can find it, check out the Frontline special called Elon Musk's Twitter Takeover, where it's very clear he's a fucking idiot. People celebrate this guy for being a business genius. He came to the U.S. because his dad owned some diamond mines in South Africa. Another title for this video I almost thought about doing was Apartheid Elon, backed and funded by apartheid money. His dad is able to get him into the U.S., get him into a good school, give him dollars to start his first company with, constantly help him out and everything. He's like, I'm a self-made man. Well, any of us are self-made if we can inherit $1 million from our father for seed capital for whatever fucking whim pops into our head. His first big business venture was to be the CEO of PayPal, where he was pretty well fired after a few months. And this isn't really the most auspicious beginning for somebody, but then he takes Tesla, which many people believe he founded. He didn't found it. He saw an opportunity and he bought Tesla off of the PayPal money that he was able to do. And a lot of people that have been interviewed talk about, he doesn't really know the nuts and bolts of what we're actually doing. He's a hindrance more than a help. He comes out with these crazy announcements about, this Tesla Tesla thing will be ready. We're going to have it ready in 6 months. It winds up being 6 years. That happened with the Cybertruck. Years of delays went by, start dates and everything that they were nowhere near. He's done this for SpaceX over and over again. They had a story on 60 Minutes about a month or so ago talking about private space exploration, and they paid him a certain amount of money to get astronauts back to the moon. First it was going to be this year, 2024. Now they're talking 2025. Now they're talking 2026. He's talking about the end of the decade. So over and over again, you see these projects where they make a bold start date and a lot of promises, and then they're delayed by several years, but he's already got the money, and he's got several $100 billion so he can do shit like buy Twitter and squander that by running it into the ground. These people are not geniuses, but we think of them as geniuses because they've inherited money and they're in the right place at the right time, and they're able to sink that money that they've earned from their parents mostly into something that may or may not even work. Twitter's value is down so much from where he bought it, and he told people, when I bought it, it was on the fast track to bankruptcy. Well, it wasn't then, but it sure is now. And if it was on the fast track to bankruptcy, why in the fuck did you pay $44 billion for it? I don't pay $44 billion for an asset that is near worthless according to you. When he took that over, he did what all these guys are doing. Employee layoffs, driving down wages, a worse customer experience. People who used to use Twitter every day barely go on there anymore. I'm one of those people. I used to use it pretty much every day. I barely go on there anymore because I know all I'm doing is generating free content for Apartheid Elon. This guy who hates my fucking guts as a liberal and has deplatformed me. My views per tweet used to be like several hundred people. Now it's like 6 people. He's deplatformed me so badly. They said, oh, well, all the conservatives, they've been deliberately deplatformed by the algorithms being tweaked. That's happened to us. He did every fucking thing he complained about. He censored journalists. He got rid of free speech. He's tweaked the algorithms to favor conservatives over liberals, himself over all people. Every goddamn thing he whined about, he did it when he took it over, which I don't think is surprising. I think you'd have to be an idiot to believe most of what he says. But that was an investment. Really could have been better spent doing anything else. This thing with the Ukrainian bill, the House won't fund border security, partly to help Trump, but they also didn't want to fund Ukraine. If you look at that aid package, it was a $90 billion aid package. About $60 billion of that would have went to Ukraine to help their essential battle to prevent their country from being totally absorbed into a bastardized version, a monstrous hybrid version of the Soviet Union. I mean, Frankenstein's monsters, what Putin's trying to build over there, it's like that fish from The Simpsons that has 12 eyes or whatever. I mean, this gross hybridized version of the old Soviet Union that he just can't let go. It only would have taken $60 billion to help them continue to fight that war, and they're very close to winning it. You see stories about 90% of the military Putin started with is gone. They're either injured to the point they can't re-enter the fight, or they're fucking dead. I mean, 90% of the supposed second best military in the world is destroyed. This is miraculous what Ukraine's been able to accomplish. But the Putin Caucus, which I referenced in episode 96, is like, do we really want to keep fighting Russia? And now that they have such control over the House, they're able to block it. But if you think $60 billion for a government to be fighting and squabbling over, that isn't that much money for an individual anymore. In terms of the very highest of the high end, Mark Zuckerberg in one day made $28 billion in Facebook stock. The stock went up enough for him to make $28 billion in one day. And I know that it ebbs and flows. It's not like people literally get a check every day from the stock market. Here's your winnings, $28 billion. I know that it fluctuates, but it's not unreasonable that Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg, and Elon Musk could easily pay $60 billion to fund the Ukrainian fight. They won't do it. They'll never do it. And they'd rather get something for free. But if Elon's got $44 billion to spend on Twitter, he could have taken the same amount of money and given it to the Ukrainian fight. I know that's not what he wants to do with it, but that's what he could have done with it, versus shutting down Ukrainian Starlink satellites at a crucial moment when they could finally beat Russia, and actually talking about journalists are sucking Zelensky's balls and things like that. He's pretty much Team Putin, so I know he's not going to do that, but he could have done it. And so that's the problem, is that individual billionaires could fund the Ukrainian war effort. Mark Zuckerberg can make $28 billion in one day, and Alabama liberals being like, oh, do we have enough money to go to Olive Garden this month? If I'm sitting here thinking about, God, $100 at the grocery store, didn't we just spend $200 last week for groceries? If it's really nickel and diming me at the grocery store, while Mark Zuckerberg can say, oh, I have enough money almost single-handedly to fund the money the government was supposed to give to Ukraine, I think you can begin to see the problem in terms of the way that our current economy is shaped and why some people are so angry. Even when you get to tech, you may have heard people refer to different tech companies as monopolies. Most of the biggest companies in tech tech, and we've had transitions in tech. Right now, everybody's talking about AI. AI this, AI that, machine learning this, machine learning that. If you walk into a venture capital firm and you have any kind of thing to do with AI, they'll throw a check at you. 5 years ago, it was the metaverse. The metaverse was going to be the great big thing that might put some people out of work, but was going to make other people rich. 10 years ago, it was cryptocurrency. 15 years ago, it was Chinese tech stocks. All this shit has mostly been smoke and mirrors. A couple of people got rich off of Bitcoin, but other than Bitcoin itself and Ethereum, most cryptocurrencies were bullshit. You saw a lot of the exchanges, FTX and others, go completely up in smoke and ruin people's lives that invested in them. Chinese tech companies, most of them were horse shit. A couple of big winners like TikTok and Alibaba, but the government was always fudging the numbers on this stuff, making it look better than it was. I predict something similar for AI, to where people are marveling like, oh my God, can you believe what ChatGPT can do? Yeah, after about 10,000 programmers have programmed it, we're all going to be put out of work by AI that we have to program. I don't think the software developers are under any illusion that if they make it too fucking good, they won't have jobs. Right now, you look at the answers that ChatGPT writes, and you can tell that they're being written by chatbots. Chatbots have been around for a while. I mean, what ChatGPT can do isn't radically different than what's been out there for a while, but because it's pumped up as a miraculous new technology, this great big thing that's going to be able to write full-length books, as if we really need that. I don't think we do. People write more books than we'll ever be able to read. I mean, writing is something people generally enjoy doing. Because it's able to be pumped up and Microsoft invested in it, it's able to temporarily make Microsoft stock spike. And we look at these companies that deal with these cutting-edge technologies, but the hugest companies today, they were the biggest companies 20 years ago. Apple's number one when it comes to cell phones. Google's number two. Those numbers have barely changed. Google's number one when it comes to search. The number twos are distant, but Microsoft has a search engine. Facebook is number one in social media. Google is number two in social media because they've got YouTube. In almost every category, cell phones, search engines, internet browsers, social media, basically the same companies have dominated them since their inceptions. Smartphones are not that old, but the same company that controlled it then controls it today. Search engines are not that old. Google was around at the very beginning. It's still around today. Each of these individual huge tech companies, Microsoft, Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon, and a couple of others, they're either number one, number two, or number three in almost every category because they've been around since pretty much the founding of the internet. The trends have changed. They've ebbed and flowed over time. Number one in each one of these categories has barely shifted. That's why they're a monopoly. That's how they've been able to accumulate. Facebook is number one in social media and has been from the beginning just about. They're able to look and be like, we don't want to be MySpace. Instagram could easily be the Facebook killer. So they buy Instagram and they absorb that into it. Nowhere else is even really competitive with Meta except TikTok, which the Chinese government owns, one of the biggest monopolies in the world, the Chinese government, and our Congress may put a ban on it. That's why when you see like Mark Zuckerberg being hauled in front of Congress and you think, why does he sit there while some smug insurrectionist prick like Josh Hawley talks down to him and lectures him? He wants the Republicans to ban TikTok completely from America. And maybe they should. It is a de facto spyware system, but he desperately wants that. So it behooves him to go before assholes like Matt Gaetz and Josh Hawley and people that frankly should be in prison either for insurrection or sex crimes. Oh, I'm so sorry. Yes, teen suicide is a very big problem. I'd like to apologize to these parents. It makes him look humble to eat shit for a day, and then they might pass legislation that bans TikTok and makes him probably the wealthiest person in the United States, especially after Elon's blown up his latest rocket. These industries that are being dominated by the same companies since their inception, they haven't shifted. These tech companies are absolutely de facto monopolies to the point where if I went into a VC firm and said, oh, I want to create a new search engine. It's better than Google. It's faster than Google. And they'd say, we have no interest in this. You'd say, but why not? You can't compete against Google. The entrenchment is just too much. There's just no way to do it. A new type of smartphone, because you think like, well, something should have replaced smartphones. We started with cell phones that were the size of a car battery. Okay, you'd hold up a cell phone to your head. It was a walkie-talkie. And then they got smaller and better, and eventually razors and flip phones and things like that. Eventually BlackBerry came out, and eventually smartphones. But we've been stuck in the smartphone model for about a decade, whereas innovation was happening constantly before that. People say, oh, I have a new thing. It's better than a smartphone. It's something that can be worn as a glove. The back of it, you could talk into it or whatever. There's all these different features and gadgets and buttons. We're not interested. Does Apple want to buy it? If Apple doesn't want to buy it, we can't even bother to compete with them. And this is happening in almost every industry. AI might make some of the people that were already the biggest tech companies on earth even bigger. That's a real problem. And this is why certain things happened during coronavirus that many of us were worried about. I was worried worried when two big things happened. Trump gave the 2017 tax cuts to huge-ass companies that were already enormous and didn't need it. And that allowed them to have this giant reserve. Something happened like coronavirus where everything shut down, a lot of businesses can't survive. They're able to scoop up remnants of certain businesses. Other businesses go out of business altogether. And then big companies get even huger because they've got this giant tax reserve surplus of money. And this is companies like Amazon have always done with their tax reserves. They wanted to compete with diapers.com, put them out of business. They temporarily lower prices. Diapers.com goes out of business, then they jack up prices because they're the only game in town if you want to buy diapers online. And we've seen that happen over and over again. That's why when Republicans constantly champion tax cuts, they're not a good thing. If you pay a high tax rate, it's because you're so successful that you're being taxed at the highest possible tax rate. If you're paying the highest possible tax rate, you're already winning compared to 99% of people who are not in that tax bracket, nowhere near you. So it's okay to tax Elon Musk billions of dollars on his hundreds of billions of dollars because he's already doing better than any of us could ever dream to do. But when you give them a huge tax rebate, when they're able to hoard that cash surplus, that's where the real problem starts. And people always say, well, no, they passed on to the workers, the consumers. There's no evidence of that. And, people have said that for decades, and it's never, ever been true. It makes no psychological sense. If I own 10 factories and you own one factory, it makes more sense for me to use tax reserves to temporarily lower my prices so I could put you out of business or buy you than I own all 11 factories or the only 10 factories that are still in business, and then I can double my prices because there's no competition. So the psychological truth of trickle-down economics never made any sense. Give rich people money so they can pass it down to poor people. Well, if you want to give poor people money, why don't you just give it to them directly? No. Trust us. Everything's going to work out. When I say customer abuse, most people, they think about it like the cashier's rude to them. And all that's true, by the way. Customer service in the U.S. has collapsed. Myself or my wife now spend about an hour a week on the phone with a company, haggling with them. It could be a cell phone company, which there's a de facto monopoly on that, only 3 huge wireless carriers in the United States, an internet company, only a couple of players in that space, a cable company, insurance companies, endless haggle, and they don't really seem to care. And usually it's a mistake they made. They overbilled us, they overcharged us. There's never a thing where they gave us $200 more than we were supposed to get. Never. That never happens with credit cards, with bank fees, with internet companies, cable companies, insurance companies. It's never a mistake where we benefit. For a really clear and final example of the new monopolies taking over, just consider Las Vegas, which I took a recent trip to. Hadn't been there in a few years, was really looking forward to it until I get there and I discover the Paris buffets now closed. Paris used to have a very good buffet, especially for breakfast. You could get made-to-order crepes that were delicious. Paris no longer has a buffet. Bellagio no longer has a dinner buffet. They only have a lunch buffet. The only 2 good mega buffets in Vegas, the home of mega buffets at this moment, are at Wynn and Caesar's Palace. Both of them cost $70 or above for adults. How did this happen where the buffets used to be such a great thing that Vegas did? Well, because they lose money on them. It's one of the only ways the casinos lose money. And now that there's only 3 real casino companies on the entire Vegas Strip, Caesar's Palace also owns Paris. So it makes no sense for them to compete against themselves with multiple buffets that lose money. They've closed the Paris buffet, and now everybody that would have gone to that is now forced to go to Caesar's Palace to eat dinner for a buffet that has slowly gotten worse over the years, even as the price has gone up. And then MGM, which owns dozens of properties all over the Strip. They used to have the really cheap buffets that they've gradually phased out. MGM also owns Bellagio. So the room prices have gone up, the buffets have been gotten rid of, overall customer service is worse, and it's only getting more expensive because they no longer really have to compete with each other as they bought more and more casinos to add to their pile. Thanks for listening. I really appreciate it. Hopefully you learned a little bit, and stay tuned for episode 99 coming up in April. Should be good as well.